Oh, good morning, protege, or of course, good afternoon to my one and only favorite afternoon class, my 8th period class. Hey, I hope this direct instructional Zoomcast finds you well. So this is my very last direct instructional Zoomcast for Unit 2 on the Roaring '20s and the Great Depression. As William Shakespeare would say, parting is such sweet sorrow. So this is going to be for Wednesday, hump day, and it's November 17th, 2021. Let's get into it, shall we? You guys know the drill at this point. So I'm going to share my screen with everybody. And again, at this point, you should already have your notes should be dated for today, top right-hand corner. Please remember, you need a blue or black pen, no red, green, purple, blue or black only ink. Please remember multiple colored highlighters, correctable tape. But again, I'm going to respectfully ask everybody, please do not be highlighting or cleaning up your ISN while you're watching the Zoomcast. I really want you to focus, give your undivided attention to the Zoomcast, and obviously you're taking your really good copious notes. All right, so what I need you to do is on the top line, I want you to write down for me guide questions, W.P.A, Works Progress Administration. So again, a quick little summary. So the Works Progress Administration was part of Franklin Roosevelt's second New Deal, 1934 into 1935. Again, at one point, over 3 million people were employed as part of the W.P.A. Again, what were they doing? Public works projects, building schools, building airports, hospitals. And at the same time, they were also hiring actors to put on plays and performances, musicians to put on musicals, artists to paint murals. It was truly a remarkable agency in terms of trying to cope with the Great Depression. And again, as a personal side note, my grammar school that I attended from 1967 through 1976, Arthur E. Canty School, was a W.P.A. school. How cool is that? All right, so here we go. So I need you to write this down. I'm going to go through these guide questions fairly quickly. So number one, so how did farmers greatly benefit from the W.P.A.? So again, kind of an interesting different take on it, because again, before we were talking about artisans and musicians and talking about building airports and building schools and hospitals. So now we're going to go to a more of an agricultural perspective. Skip a line or two. Number two, what else did the W.P.A. do to help the growth of American cities, especially in the West, the western part of the United States of America? Again, I'm going to be starting up the video soon. This is a longer guide question. So again, you guys have been doing a really good job of pausing the Zoomcast when you need to allow yourself to get caught up, take your copious notes. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to get into our first of several video clips today. This is about 4 minutes and 20 seconds long, the W.P.A.
Vital to the communities which they serve are the thousands of miles of highways, constructed and improved by the Works program. The need for first-class highways grows constantly, as the automobile and the motor truck become increasingly important in both city and rural commerce. In many regions, great loss has befallen farmers and other rural residents during periods of bad weather which made secondary roads impassable. The need for adequate farm-to-market roads, which would make the transportation of farm produce independent of weather conditions, has been recognized in all parts of the country. But not until the beginning of the Works program was it possible to initiate a general plan for the development of farm-to-market roads. This plan brings immediate improvement in local business and property values wherever a secondary road is completed. At last, the farmer finds it possible to reach his market over well-constructed, weatherproof roads. In all these construction projects, local labor is employed, and wherever possible, the raw materials are obtained from quarries in the immediate vicinity. How big is the W.P.A. road program? In its first 18 months of operation, the mileage end to end would have stretched 5 times around the earth. In many parts of the country are regions which depend largely upon the tourist's trade as a local industry. Areas of great scenic beauty have been made available to thousands of visitors through the development of systems of roads in national and state parks and at other centers of attraction for tourists. Many of these vacation spots were completely inaccessible before the assistance of the Works program made road construction possible. The welfare of the community served by a new construction project is always the first consideration, and plans are laid not only for the present, but for the more demanding future. In the field of public health, many important and permanent improvements have been undertaken. The water resources of thousands of cities and towns have been expanded by the construction of reservoirs and water supply systems, ensuring an adequate supply of water for the community's needs for many years to come. A particularly interesting example of a long-felt need met by the Works program is this reservoir at Atlantic City. Although this resort entertains millions of visitors every year, it never has had an adequate water supply until this reservoir was built. Another type of permanent construction is this community stadium, representative of a large group of projects that provide facilities for public gatherings all over America. In cooperation with other federal agencies, many important improvements have been made under the Works program at the Brooklyn Navy Yard and other centers of government activity. As an aid to traffic, hundreds of new bridges have been completed, designed to withstand high waters and the pounding of heavy loads. Thousands of other bridges have been repaired and made safe. Many cities have been freed from the peril of disease by the provision of modern, scientifically correct sewage systems, which often replace antiquated systems entirely inadequate for the needs of the community. Developments such as these are always undertaken with the cooperation of the public health agencies serving each locality, and the projects are carried out under the supervision of competent sanitary engineers. The rapid growth of air traffic outdistanced airport for hundreds of cities seized the opportunity offered by the W.P.A. to build or improve modern airports. One of the busiest of all airports is at Newark. This field is the eastern terminus of all of the great transcontinental airlines, and hundreds of transport ships land and take off from its runways every day. At Newark, as at a great many other cities, the Works program has provided jobs for thousands of workers in the improvement of existing facilities and in new construction.
So again, a couple of takeaways. Great video, by the way. Number one, again, ties in very much with the goals of what Roosevelt hoped to achieve with the New Deal. So it's about job creation, number one. And number two, it's not just creating jobs, but what are you doing to improve the quality of life? Building roads, making it easier to transport goods from the farms, the rural areas to the cities. And number two, again, I love when he talked about irrigation, bringing water to places out in the West, out in Arizona, the desert-like regions, allowing more and more people to migrate to those parts of the country. Truly remarkable what they were able to achieve during the time of a tremendous crisis. All right, so what I want you to do is skip a full page. Pardon me, I want you guys to go to the right side of the next clean sheet of paper. Make certain again that you date your notes for today. It is November 17, 2021. Yes, it's hump day and the very last direct instructional Zoomcast on Unit 2. So let's continue on with Roosevelt's New Deal. So let's talk about another one. So let's talk about the National Recovery Administration. So we've already learned about the W.P.A., Works Progress Administration. We learned about the Civilian Conservation Corps, the CCC. Remember, they were planting trees that shelter belt from basically North Dakota all the way down to the Texas Panhandle to stop erosion, prevent future dust storms from passing through and destroying property. So now we got what's called the National Recovery Administration. All right, a couple of things. Number one, got to know the acronym. A lot of acronyms. Remember, CCC, W.P.A. Here's another one. The N.I.R.A. And remember to put periods between your capital letters. Again, representing the National Recovery Administration. And if you direct your attention up to my screen top, if you will, this, of course, represents the emblem of the N.R.A. Again, we do our part. All right, so what does the N.R.A. do? So again, it's going to enforce a really important piece of legislation that was passed by Congress, signed into law by, of course, President Franklin Roosevelt, and it's called the National Industrial Recovery Act, the N.I.R.A. So in order to understand, again, the National Relief, again, Administration, again, enforcing the National Industrial Recovery Act, you got to know a little something about, again, we talk about those ideologies, the conservative, the liberal, the radical. So it's at this point that Roosevelt absolutely, he's embraced the liberal ideology. But in some ways, some people are saying, is he starting to move away from the liberal ideology? And is he moving more towards the radical ideology? You know what? You tell me. So what's the purpose behind the National Industrial Recovery Act? All right, so number one, so what does it do? It's going to create guidelines for regulating American industry. Now, keep in mind, we go back to those three political ideologies. Conservatives had the alligator arms. They said, no, it's not the job of the federal government to getting involved in big business. The liberal mindset, the liberal ideology is, yeah, the federal government should be more actively involved in regulating. Whereas now the radicals are saying we need to completely transform the way our economy functions. Well, what's happening now is those lines are being blurred, because what's happening is it's more than just the federal government regulating industry. They're really now dictating in terms of how industry is going to operate with regards to dealing with the Great Depression. So for example, number one, there's very strict guidelines that the federal government through the N.I.R.A. are going to offer in terms of production, in terms of how much companies or how much industry can produce and what they're going to produce. Number two, the N.I.R.A., the National Industrial Recovery Act, is also going to regulate wages. So it's no longer necessarily the boss of the industry or the factory. It's not Rockefeller. It's not Carnegie who's determining how much money their workers are going to make. It's really Franklin Roosevelt's making that determination. And number three, they even regulate how much these different industries are charging for prices of goods. So again, I go back to my original supposition. So yes, Franklin Roosevelt was the leader, of the liberal, there we go, of the liberal ideology. But there are now critics of Roosevelt that are saying, it seems to us, he's kind of moving away from the liberal ideology and he's moving more towards the radical ideology because the government is truly taking over. So what do you think? You know what I would do? Stop the Zoomcast. I want you to pause, draw a line off to the side. So do you feel that Roosevelt is becoming or embracing the radical ideology? Is he cutting the tree down, or is he simply pruning? Take a few minutes, continue on. Of course, when you're done, I'm going to continue on with the Zoomcast. Oh, and one other thing. The N.I.R.A., the act, of course, again, being enforced by the N.R.A., is going to regulate working conditions as well. So if you direct your attention to the overhead screen, I love this photograph. So this woman is hanging up a sign in her restaurant and it says N.R.A., the National Recovery Administration, and it says, we do our part. So the point of it is businesses that had these signs up in their windows, this particular symbol with the eagle, that was supposed to basically be an incentive for people to frequent those places. Okay, let's continue on. All right, moving on. Next major part of the New Deal, and it's called the Tennessee Valley Authority. So once again, yeah, you got to know your acronyms. We have the CCC. We have, of course, the W.P.A., the Works Progress Administration. You just learned about the N.I.R.A., the National Industrial Recovery Act. And now you have the TVA. You have the Tennessee Valley Authority. Also, again, the TVA. So a couple of things. Number one, the TVA is considered to be the boldest agency of the New Deal. I want everybody to notice how I bolded the word boldest. You might want to circle that and put a big star by that. Anytime a teacher is, lecturing or giving direct instruction, whether it's in person or on a Zoomcast, and they really emphasize a word and they bold it and such, or those ST words, boldest, biggest, fewest, least, and so on, that's usually a good clue that could be a potential test question. Hint, hint, hint. So what's the purpose behind the TVA? The purpose is simple. What Franklin Roosevelt wanted to do, and this is why this is such a bold, audacious program. What Roosevelt wanted to do was to rescue and revitalize a part of the country that had been kind of stuck in time, to be honest with you. And this part of the country is what we call the Tennessee Valley. So what were some of the places that constitute the Tennessee Valley? Number one, Tennessee, hence Tennessee Valley. Tennessee is greatly going to benefit from the TVA. Georgia is another state that's going to benefit from the TVA. Mississippi, I'm going to go through these quickly, so you guys are going to have to pause it at this point. That's perfectly fine. I'm just going to continue on. Is another state that's going to be under the auspices of the TVA. Tennessee, I should mention Alabama earlier. That's right, I did say Alabama. Tennessee, I said earlier, so it's Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi, Tennessee. There we go. I was thinking ahead already. So all these states are going to benefit from, of course, the TVA, the Tennessee Valley Authority. Kentucky is another state that's going to benefit from the TVA. Virginia is another state that's going to benefit from the TVA. And then finally, North Carolina. So all of these states, to summarize, Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi, Tennessee, Kentucky, Virginia, North Carolina, all of these states are going to greatly benefit from what many historians consider the boldest action, the boldest agency of Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal. So if you direct your attention up to, of course, my laptop screen, so this is a map illustrating where the TVA targeted. Of course, most of it would be in Tennessee, the whole state, a little bit of Kentucky right here. Here's Virginia, here's North Carolina here, a swatch of Georgia, a swatch of Alabama, and a swatch of Mississippi. All right, so what are we going to do? So what's the results of the TVA? Why is this so bold? So number one, kind of sort of sounds a little bit like the W.P.A. Remember how in the video clip we just watched, how they were building bridges and they were building dams and providing irrigation for the folks out west. Dams are going to be built, but this time we're going to focus on the southeastern part of the United States of America. So if you direct your attention to the overhead screen, this is a dam that was built, and I believe, if my memory serves me correctly, that's the Tennessee River. Number two, now in conjunction with these dams, powerhouses are also going to be built. And the main purpose behind these powerhouses is to generate something that large segments of the populations in Georgia and Alabama and Mississippi and Tennessee and Kentucky and Virginia, and of course, North Carolina, they still didn't have electricity. I mean, you can think about it. You started seeing the electric lights going in the 1880s, in the 1890s. Remember, it was when Benjamin Harrison was president, and electric lights were installed in the White House. So it's been decades already, and there were still parts of the country that were still operating with kerosene lanterns or lamps. And if you direct your attention to the overhead screen, this, of course, is an example of a powerhouse in conjunction with the dam. The water rushes through, and it generates electricity. So there's your science lesson being woven in terms of the fabric of what we're studying in terms of history. Oh, and one other thing the TVA did, dredging. So this is where I'm going to go, Mrs. Hawley. I'm going to go science with you guys. So dredging means that they're like, for example, the Tennessee River. A lot of sediment starts to build at the bottom. And as a result, it's very challenging for ships to be able to navigate those rivers because it's hard to get through because because of the sediment, their ships get stuck. So dredging means you're going to try to remove all that excess sediment at the bottom of the river, allowing the river to flow more easily and allowing more ships to be able to access it in order to transport goods. So you see how I'm weaving all this information together. All right. So what I want you to do is I want you to skip a full page. I want you to go to the right side of the next clean sheet of paper. This is going to be our next major video clip we're going to watch. Date your notes again for today. It is November 17, 2021. It's Wednesday and it's hump day. All right, write down for me, video clip, Tennessee Valley Authority. Let me move this down for you guys so you can see it. There we go. Much better. All right. So once again, I'm going to go through these guide questions relatively quickly. Again, you guys have been doing such an awesome job. I love the fact that you're pausing the Zoomcast, allowing yourself the opportunity of getting caught up and writing down this information. Great job, everybody. I'm really proud of you. Here we go. Number one. So what problems affected the Tennessee Valley? I left this part out. I just gave you a very general, generic overview of the Tennessee Valley Authority. Now we're going to go into a little more detail through, of course, the video clip. Skip a line or two. Number two, what was the goal of the TVA? What was it trying to achieve? Remember, this was considered to be the boldest action and the boldest agency of Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal. Number three, any stats? Like, for example, how many hydroelectric dams were built as a result of the TVA? Now, am I going to ask you as a question or as a question on the assessment, how many dams were built? No. But I might use those stats within the context of an answer choice or maybe a context clue. So that's why I always say to students over the years, you hear a stat, write it down, okay? Next guy question. What impact did electricity have on the Tennessee Valley? Remember, folks, there were parts of our country in the early part of the 20th century, even though a lot of parts of the country had electric lights, had electricity, but there were parts of the country that did not, like the Tennessee Valley. How did radios impact the Tennessee Valley? All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're about ready. So this video clip's about 4 minutes and 35 seconds long. The Tennessee Valley Authority.
The Tennessee Valley Authority. During the 1930s, there were few regions of the country that were worse off than the region known as the Tennessee Valley. Where is the Tennessee Valley? How did the New Deal help this area? The area known as the Tennessee Valley includes portions of Tennessee, Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, and Kentucky. For years, this region was far behind the rest of the nation in many areas of life. Electricity, running water, sewers, and proper sanitation were all elements of our modern life that were sorely lacking in the Tennessee Valley during the 1930s. One of the major goals of many New Deal programs was to help modernize the South and improve living conditions in those states. The most notable of these New Deal programs became known as the Tennessee Valley Authority, or the TVA. The TVA's goal was to build hydroelectric dams throughout the area, which would bring electricity into thousands of homes. Eventually, the TVA would construct and maintain more than 30 hydroelectric dams that provided inexpensive power to millions of Southerners. In 1933, it was estimated that only 2% of homes in the Tennessee Valley had electricity. By 1945, this number had been improved to 75%. Bringing electricity to the region was extremely important. Not only did home appliances and electric lighting make life easier, but there were other benefits as well. Factories and other businesses were now able to locate in the region and employ thousands of workers. There were also health benefits to the increased availability of electricity. Better lighting meant improved eyesight and a reduced risk of accidents. Electric refrigerators allowed Southerners to keep food longer without it spoiling. This meant they could purchase food from the grocery store rather than depending on homegrown produce and dairy products. Electricity also meant that Southerners could purchase what the rest of the nation had been enjoying for the past decade or more, a radio. The radio proved very meaningful in the isolated Tennessee Valley region. It helped Southerners feel more connected to the rest of the nation. They could now listen to the same news and radio programs that people from New York to Los Angeles were listening to. Aside from providing electricity, the TVA was also concerned with soil conservation. The organization promoted the use of fertilizers and crop rotation to improve soil conditions. The TVA also had programs to improve fish and wildlife habitats, control wildfires, and replant forests. The TVA was not always popular. The construction of the hydroelectric dams caused more than 15,000 families to lose their homes. The areas were flooded to make lakes and reservoirs. Also, many Southerners were suspicious of government officials. Therefore, the TVA had to recruit local citizens to speak to their neighbors about soil conservation techniques. Other New Deal programs were created to help fight diseases. Hookworm, pellagra, malaria, typhoid, and diphtheria had long plagued the South. These diseases were spread through poor sewage and sanitation systems, which allowed germs and bacteria to spread rapidly. New sewer systems in major cities helped reduce the number of deaths caused by diphtheria and typhoid. New water treatment facilities also improved the condition of drinking water. Swamp drainage in South Carolina resulted in a 16% drop in malaria cases, and mosquito eradication efforts helped reduce malaria-related deaths by 66%. There were similar successes in reducing the number of cases of dysentery, hookworm, and pellagra.
Great video. So a couple of takeaways. Number one, so again, the boldest action agency of the first New Deal, 1933. Two, I thought it was interesting when, again, the narrator pointed out that, again, you're bringing electricity to this area of the country and the radio. And I thought it was very powerful because now it's not just entertainment, but I love the fact he talked about that the same news program that somebody in New York or Los Angeles or Chicago are listening to, now the folks in the Deep South were listening to as well. So it's really bringing this country more closely together. In some ways, parts of the South were still suffering from the aftermath of the Civil War. And my third takeaway was tying in with the Civil War, how they had to have locals talk about the TVA because they were suspicious of, again, government officials showing up. And that goes back to the Reconstruction era from 1865 through 1876/77, when federal troops were removed from the Deep South. There was some really lingering bad blood that some Southerners felt when, again, Northern troops, the Union, were occupying the South in rebuilding the Confederacy and trying to put our country back together again. All right, let's continue on. Skip a full page. Go to the right side of the next clean sheet of paper. Once again, I'd like you guys to date your notes again for today. It's November 17th, 2021. All right, two more agencies I want to talk about. Number one, or actually number five in this case. So now we're going to move on to what's called the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, also known as the FDIC. Yes, you have to know your acronyms. So remember, Civilian Conservation Corps, CCC, Works Progress Administration, W.P.A, Tennessee Valley Authority, TVA, and now you've got the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, also known as the FDIC. All right, so what did it do? So if you direct your attention to the overhead screen, the next time you're with mom and dad and you're going to the bank, okay, it could be the Harris Bank on Arlington Heights Road and Route 83, the Chase Bank in downtown Buffalo Grove, you should see the FDIC emblem somewhere on the doors as you walk in. That means that the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, is guaranteeing that the money you have in that bank is safe to be there. All right, so if you would please write this down. So this ties in with something that I had actually talked about earlier, and that's the Emergency Banking Relief Act in 1933. So remember when Franklin Roosevelt, our president, had reopened the banks on March 8th, 1933. He shut all the banks down for 4 days for a bank holiday, and then he opens them back up again. So now remember, banks had to guarantee they had sufficient money to be able to open their doors. And also, number two, the federal government is now going to send out a guarantee to the American people. And it's going to act like an insurance company, like State Farm or Allstate or Geico. And now the federal government's going to guarantee that all deposits in banks would be safe. The government does not want people to pull their money out and hide it in their mattress or dig a hole in their backyard, which again, some of your ancestors were probably doing. And this would be guaranteed all the way up to $5,000. Real simple. Now that you know that the government is guaranteeing that your money will be in the bank, you're more apt to leave your money in the bank. And this is really important to trying to jumpstart our economy. So that takes me to my 2 points. Number one, so what are the purposes behind the FDIC? And it dovetails right off of what I just stated. So now that you know that up to $5,000 in 1933 would be guaranteed by the federal government, now what people are doing is they're not only leaving their money in their bank accounts, but they're beginning to once again deposit their money into bank accounts and not stuffing it into their bed mattresses. They were petrified that they wouldn't have their money if the bank closed its doors. And number two, again, what was the big purpose behind the FDIC? We want to stop something that caused this crisis with regards to the failure of the banking system. And what caused the banking system to fail were those bank runs. And remember, if you direct your attention to the overhead screen, so here's a photograph of an infamous bank run. All these people have heard whispers that the bank was running out of funds. And so they're all storming into the bank to pull their money out. Eventually, the bank's going to close its doors. And anybody in this crowd that had money in that particular bank would now be penniless. All right, finally, this is going to be the last major government agency action I'm going to cover with you guys regarding Franklin Roosevelt. There's others like the Agricultural Adjustment Administration, the AAA, but I decided we're going to stop with this one. Some of the other agencies you guys are going to be focusing on your own. So the last one I want to share with you is called the Social Security Act of 1935, which will in turn create what's called the Social Security Administration. All right. Oh, and by the way, before I go any further, draw a line off to the side. So this also is going to be in Franklin Roosevelt's second New Deal. So the first one was 1933, second one focusing more in 1934 into 1935. All right. So the Social Security Act in 1935, which will create what's called the Social Security Administration, was really the baby. It's a figure of speech I love to use, meaning it's something very important to two individuals. Okay. Number one, Social Security Act was very, very personal to Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Now you have to ask the question, why? Because one of the key words you're going to hear when I talk about Social Security is dependence, okay? When Franklin Roosevelt contracted polio way back in 1921, he learned that he needed to depend on others to help him. And he now came to realize that with the Great Depression, there were people that needed to be able to depend on the federal government. And that was one of the reasons why Roosevelt really wanted to create this Social Security Administration. All right, moving on. Now, the other key player that you're going to need to know, who is, again, instrumental in the Social Security Act, which will in turn lead to the Social Security Administration, was a gal by the name of Frances Perkins. And again, if you direct your attention up to the overhead screen, please take a good look at this photograph. You might even want to pause the Zoomcast when you guys are looking at these photographs. Just take a couple of moments. Take a good look at this photograph. Don't be surprised if you see that photograph or facsimile thereof on the assessment. Hopefully this will trigger something in your brains when you're trying to diagnose the question to get it right. So Frances Perkins is pretty special. Frances Perkins was Roosevelt's Secretary of Labor under all four, or let me rephrase that, during all four of his terms. He was elected in 32, 36, 40, and 44. She's only one of two cabinet members that was with Roosevelt from the beginning until the very end. That's pretty special. And number two, the other thing about Frances Perkins is she has a distinction. Frances Perkins is the first, and you might want to circle first in your ISN, the first woman to serve in a president's cabinet. That's progressive. That's thinking outside the box. Remember, wasn't it Franklin Roosevelt's big cousin Theodore who appointed Oscar S. Strauss as his Secretary of Labor, who was the first Jewish American to serve in a president's cabinet? Coincidence? I don't think there's any coincidence at all. Square deal, New Deal. How are they connected besides the word deal and they're dealing with the Roosevelts? Opportunity. That's what it really comes down to, opportunities. All right, let's continue on. So there were three major purposes regarding the Social Security Act in 1935. This is one of the most important elements of the Second New Deal. And I always talk about Social Security because of when you look at the different things that Roosevelt did during his administration, during the New Deal, this is an action, this is an agency that's still vibrant, still going strongly today. All right, number one. So one of the things Roosevelt felt very strongly about is we need a pension system. A pension system means that what happens when you reach a certain age and you're no longer capable of working? How are you going to be able to support yourself, provide the necessities for you and your family, your food, your shelter, and your clothing? So basically what he did was from the time you were 62 years old, you would be paying into this system and you would be getting monthly checks from the federal government. And these checks were designed to allow you to be able to pay your bills. And remember, you wouldn't necessarily be able to work at this point. So if you direct your attention up to the overhead screen, this is a photograph, again, of a couple of elder Americans who are now benefiting from Social Security. They paid into it, and now they're reaping the benefits of it by receiving a monthly check to pay for their expenses because they may not be able to work. Number two, this is significant. Social Security Administration, again, which was created as a result of the Social Security Act of 1935, creates a system for the unemployed. Now, remember, you go back to that economic recession, 1919, 1920, 1921, there's no safety net. You don't work, you don't make money. When the Great Depression started in 1929, when the stock market crashed first on Black Thursday and then 5 days later on Black Tuesday, and again, by 1933, 25 million people, 25%, I should say, of the American population was not working. And no one's offering them any financial help. You don't work. Good luck trying to take care of your family. But now, if you're unemployed, you'll be able to get some type of compensation, some economic assistance through the Social Security Administration. And if you direct your attention to the overhead screen, this photograph should look very familiar. I shared this with you a while back. Why are all these guys standing in line? Not just, again, because they're going to get a free cup of coffee and some donuts, but because they are all unemployed. And then number three, another thing that the Social Security Act of 1935 did was it created a system of support. And specifically, it targeted two different groups. Number one, targeted disabled children, children with some type of physical handicap. Where's the connection with Roosevelt's? Folks, draw a line off to the side, ladies and gents. Roosevelt contracting polio. He understood when he contracted polio back in 1921. And yes, he learned to walk with the assistance of braces and crutches, but he understood the importance of getting the necessary support. And he remembered how he depended on people to help him learn how to walk with some assistance. This was very, very important to Roosevelt to reach out and help children with physical disabilities. And number two, another thing Social Security did was it helped what we call dependent children. Now, what do we mean by dependent children? Well, think of the word dependent. Who are you dependent on? You're dependent on your mom and your dad. You're dependent on them because you're expecting them to take care of you in terms of the necessities of life, your food, your shelter, your clothing. Those are your big three. But what happens if you don't have parents or a parent, singular? So if you direct your attention to the overhead screen, these are all orphan children. They're being raised in an orphanage back in the 1930s, and they would be provided some economic assistance in terms of dealing with their care. Now, I, Mr. Bonk, have a personal connection with Social Security, and the connection is being a dependent child. So in 1973, when yours truly, Mr. Bonk, was 11 years old, my dad passed away at the age of 42. So my mom was by herself now, and she was raising three boys. Myself, I was 11. My middle brother, Joe, was 9. My youngest brother, Tommy, had just turned 3. And so at that point, my mom had to make a big decision. Does she go back to work to help pay the bills and be able to support the family? or because my dad had been paying into Social Security since he started working at the age of 18. So every month, my mom would get 3 checks, 1 check for my youngest brother, 1 check for my middle brother, and 1 check for me. And so as a result of this, my mom didn't have to go to work. And as a result of this, my mom was home for us. See, growing up in Chicago, we didn't eat a lunch at school. We all went home for lunch. Yeah, we used to get an hour for lunch. Sorry, guys. And then we would come back to school. And then we would come home after school. We would be out at 3:15, and we would come home and do our homework, play, and then we would eat dinner. And every day I knew that my mom would have dinner waiting for us. Now, if my mom had been working, had it not been for Social Security, my brothers and I would have to basically ostensibly raise ourselves and fend for ourselves and make our own meals. And would we have had that structure, that self-discipline to be able to take care of ourselves and do our homework? Maybe, but probably not. And so I'm 100% convinced, and I say this every year, I talk about Social Security, that I wouldn't be in the position I'm in right now as your history mentor had it not been for the Social Security Act. I think my timeline would have been a very different one. I don't think I would have ever gone to college. And because of Social Security, I went to college, my middle brother went to college, and my younger brother went to college because we had the stability of having our mom there. And so that's why every year I always say, thank you, President Roosevelt, and thank you, Francis Perkins, for the Social Security Act in 1935, which not only affected folks in 1935, but also impacted folks in 1975 too. All right, so here's what I want you to do. I want you to skip a full page, go to the right side of the next clean sheet of paper. Make certain that you date your notes again for today. It is November 17th, 2021. Yeah, a plethora of video clips today, kids. So here's your third one. Social Security Act, 1935. This is why I love now having the technology and the ability to work in these video clips to really, again, kind of fill in the gaps for what I just talked about. All right, so we're going to go through these guy questions quickly. Number one, so according to President Roosevelt, according to FDR, how would Social Security impact American citizens? So again, I'm going to go through this relatively quickly because I know you guys can pause the Zoomcast. Pause it. Give yourself a chance to catch up to write these guy questions down. You need to write everything down. It's a non-negotiable. Skip a line or two. All right, ladies and gentlemen. Well, I thought I had more than that. There's only one guy question. All right, so let's get into it. So ladies and gentlemen, this video clip is relatively short. It's a little under 2 minutes long. President Roosevelt signing the Social Security Act into law and then talking about it. How powerful and how personal it is to yours truly, Mr. Bonk.
Today, a hope of many years standing is in large part fulfilled. The civilization of the past 100 years, with its startling industrial changes, has tended more and more to make life insecure. Young people have come to wonder what would be their lot when they came to old age. The man with a job has wondered how long the job would last. This Social Security measure gives at least some protection to 30 million of our citizens who will reap direct benefits through unemployment compensation, through old age pensions, and through increased services for the protection of children and the prevention of ill health. We can never insure 100% of the population against 100% of the hazards and vicissitudes of life, but we have tried to frame a law which will give some measure of protection to the average citizen and to his family against the loss of a job and against poverty-stricken old age. Seems to me that if the Senate and the House of Representatives in this long and arduous session had done nothing more than pass this security bill, Social Security Act, the session would be regarded as historic for all time.
How powerful. And again, dovetailing off of what President Roosevelt talked about, taking care of the elderly. How are they going to be able to pay their bills and take care of themselves if they're not able to work anymore? Pensions, taking care of people that are unemployed, who are wondering, will I be able to pay my bills? Will I be able to feed my family? And again, taking care of children who are orphaned or dependent children like yours truly, Mr. Bonk, when my dad died when I was very young. So it was such, and I agree. I mean, when you think about all the things that Roosevelt did, and again, it's really hard to prioritize, what was the most significant? Was it the CCC with the tree planting? Was it with the W.P.A? Was it the Tennessee Valley Authority that transformed the southeastern part of the United States? On the other hand, Social Security still impacts us very much today. As a matter of fact, when you guys start working your first part-time job, whether it's at Portillo's or Burger King or Jamba Juice, you look at your paycheck, you'll be paying into Social Security, and that goes back to 1935. That's how you make your connection. All right, finally, write this down. So I want you to skip a full page. I want you to go to the right side of the next clean sheet of paper. Yes, we're finishing up, kids. Here we go. So on the right side of the next clean sheet of paper, make sure that you date your notes again for today. One more time, it's November 17, 2021. And we're going to finish up with our final major accomplishment of one Franklin Delano Roosevelt, but we're not done with him yet. So again, to track our steps, what were some of his accomplishments? To summarize, to tie everything together, that's what we always do. We learned about the Brain Trust, his group of economic advisors. We learned about the first 100 days, a flurry of activity, action now. Things like, again, repealing prohibition, the 18th Amendment, and of course, that's repealed through the 21st Amendment, shutting down and closing the banks, remember, for 4 days, the bank holiday, and then reopening them again through the Emergency Banking Relief Act, creating the FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, and then you learn about various programs and agencies of the New Deal: relief, recovery, reform. So finally, what's the last thing Roosevelt is remembered for? Whoa, well, look at this. So we're going to move away temporarily from the Great Depression, and we're going to be talking about America's involvement in a war of all wars, maybe the most significant war ever waged in recorded history. And that, of course, is World War II. However, we're not going to talk about it now. We're going to be talking about it later on. We'll be talking about this in January of next year, and that, of course, is 2022. So if you direct your attention up to the overhead screen, Franklin Roosevelt's will be back again. We're not done with Mr. Roosevelt. He's going to be matching wits and dealing with these two individuals. This gentleman right here, his name is Benito Mussolini Il Duce, the leader of Italy. And this guy is a guy by the name of Adolf Hitler. I always call him Adolf Schicklgruber. I'll explain why. Adolf Hitler will become the undisputed leader of Nazi Germany. But ladies and gentlemen, I always like to say that's another story for another time. So at this point, I'd like everybody to do me a big, big favor. I would like everybody to please take out your correctable tape, go through your ISN. You took multiple sets of notes. Clean up anything you crossed out or traced over. No crossing out, no tracing over letters. This is a portfolio of your absolute best effort. Highlighters, multiple colored highlighters, especially when you're doing guide questions in your notes from your video clips. Tip at a tip. Focus on those words you can visualize in your mind, the persons, places, and things. Please remember, you're not done yet. You're going to go back and review your ISN 10 to 15 minutes every day. You're getting ready for the big assessment. In this instance, the assessment is going to be tomorrow. And remember, you take the opportunity, hand your ISN to your mom or dad. You channel your inner Mr. Bonk. It's the most natural, organic way to study. Talk about the Tennessee Valley Authority and how Franklin Roosevelt, this was his boldest action or agency in trying to change a part of the country, the Southeast. Talk about the Social Security Act and how, on a very personal level, Franklin Roosevelt and Francis Perkins, as Secretary of Labor, on a personal level affected me, Mr. Bonk. See, that's what history you should be doing, is weaving together the personal stories. It makes it more meaningful. Don't memorize. Remember, tell the story. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed my final direct instructional Zoomcast for the Great Depression in Unit 2 as much as I love making it. And as I always like to say, as I wrap up one of my direct instructional Zoomcasts, well, you know, kids, the story may have ended today, but you know the saga is going to continue tomorrow. And the rest, as we say, everyone, is history. Peace out, everybody. Thank you so much. And my next Zoomcast will be on Unit 3, the Great War, World War I. Be well.